What I came to realise by studying creativity is that actually this isn't just some folly. Creativity is the very reason that humans are on this planet today. Yeah, there's that old thing that creativity kind of happens on its own timeline, but ultimately, builders have to go and work 9 till 5 and build a house. They might not be feeling it. We have to find a certain degree of self-discipline. So when I was a new dad, I wrote my first 2 fiction books. And this isn't a badge of honour. It's not going, look at me, look how productive I was. And I did a lot of this on the toilet and on dog walks. All I had to do was write 1 line of those that I liked, that I felt good about. And then I could be a dad for the rest of the day without feeling like I wasn't doing anything for me.
There are attributes or qualities you have which I think are essential if you want to be successful. The first one is you clearly have a very high level of self-awareness. The second thing is in today's episode, I am joined by illustrator and author Ben Tallon. Ben has been running his illustration business for over 16 years and has worked with clients such as Channel 4, The Guardian, Premier League, New York Times. I could go on. The reason I invited Ben onto the podcast is because he has an incredible way of articulating and deconstructing some of the principles and strategies that have allowed him to create such an impressive body of work. Not only has Ben written 2 books and worked with all these amazing clients, but he's consistently worked on passion projects and things that light him up, whilst even being a father of twins. I think you'll enjoy today's episode. We get stuck into everything from using your personality to win and retain more clients, to finding and maintaining that creative spark in your work, and way, way more. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please do share it with a friend and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Ben, as creatives, we all know the importance of the creative process, but often it's difficult to communicate that to clients. And I'm wondering, as somebody who's been running their own business for the last 16 years, what are some things that you found helpful to get clients to understand the importance of creativity and the creative process?
What I've found invariably over the years is that people listen. Clients are always, they respect the fact that you want to do a good job for them and know their needs, understand their audience, what they need to get out of a job. And I think that sometimes, certainly in my younger years, I had a tendency to be a little defensive, So if I got a poor brief, for example, I would tend to grumble first, as opposed to take it back to the client and suggest improvements. But as time's gone on, you get a bit braver and you get a bit less tolerant, but in a good way. You want to get the best out of a job. And I think if you're honest and you express that in the right way and have good open dialogue from the outset on a job, I've found usually that if there's not too many cooks, that people will listen and people will be very happy that you want to improve that. And 9 times out of 10, they'll accept an idea or at least compromise and listen to a better solution. It's not that I always know better or anything like that, but I think that when you pitch it right and when you explain to them why we need to explore more, for example, or we need to reconsider a certain aspect, I think that people they're open. People want that. And I think it's as much about people skills at times and about creating a holistic environment on a project. And if everyone feels valued within that, then I think people always want to drive for the best solution for everyone.
And what are some of the ways that you've found successful in terms of that framing? And you kind of talked about, if you position it right, what are some maybe more specifics or some strategies that you now have in the background when you have a difficult client or a poor brief that you kind of bring to the surface?
I take a step back. I won't always, if this is an initial meeting, for example, I won't go in strong, and call people out, because people get defensive, and rightly so. This is their project. They've put time into this, and their professional reputations are often on the line. But what I've found is if you just take a moment and you're able to go away and articulate why you feel strongly about a different direction or challenging on something, then I think if you can come back and lay that out in a way that involves people and approaches that from the right standpoint, as in the end user, I believe that this is. So I'll give you an example at the moment. So I'm about to go on this job. This is a live project. I'm working with TBWA at Cannes Lions in France. And they had a sort of idea. So this is a conference about breaking through algorithmic creativity. And they call themselves the disruption brand. And yet what they had in mind was to get someone with my, a lively, energetic, organic style to come in, paint live. But they had this idea of a roadmap, and I could almost transcribe what they were talking about as opposed to do the thing that they're discussing, the problem that they're trying to get around, which was be creative, be spontaneous. 16 years into the game, I was able to kind of say, no, I think that's the wrong approach. I actually think that's almost the opposite of what we should be doing here. We can do the road mapping retrospectively, but why would you bring in someone who's going to work on a 2.5 meter by 2 meter canvas with such a cool conversation and do something that's preordained? Let's let loose here. Let's be spontaneous. Let's capture the sort of nuts and bolts of what's been talked about. And I saw people kind of, giving it the thumbs up on the video call, and I think they were really delighted that I'd sort of come forward and said that. Now, the advantage I had there is that I was having a direct conversation with the CEO, and what you get internally sometimes is a little too much respect and a little fear to kind of tread on toes. I didn't have that. As an outsider coming in, I was very excited about this brief, and I didn't want that excitement to be knocked because I know that is going to deliver the quality. That's what's going to get me my optimal creative, space. So I expressed that very friendly, very nicely, but I said, this is why I believe that, and everyone was on board. And I think in the end, the CEO was delighted to hear that, and they all felt more pumped because of it.
I know a lot of people would be intimidated in that situation where they're on the call with the CEO and a few other people, and maybe they're worried about rocking the boat. In that moment, where is your focus and what does your internal narrative sound like?
I got that slight wave of reluctance. When this kind of roadmap got mentioned, I knew where this was headed because I've seen brilliant transcribers do their thing live, but that's not what I should be doing with a style that's so spontaneous. So I got that feeling, that gut feeling of, oh no, we can't do that with this project, and I had to voice it. I have to travel for this job. It's quite a commitment to get on the road for 2 days and go and do this and source all the materials. So I want to feel as energized as I can about that. So that's my feeling, but I let everyone talk it out. I made little notes quietly to myself there. And then when I felt it was the apt time in the conversation, when everyone was kind of feeling good, stepped forward and said, well, how about we do it this way instead? Because you've got a live audience and certainly you want some impact from this live performance. You want some showmanship. Here's how we deliver that. And again, it was very much with their desires, their client, their kudos was my line of thinking. This wasn't about what does Ben Tallon want to get out of this job. This is how do you get the best of Ben Tallon to get the best of TBWA's presentation at a big festival. And I think that's what was recognised, is that my reasoning wasn't selfish.
I love that. There's two really, really important points there. I think the first one is exactly what you just ended with, was my reasoning wasn't selfish. You didn't make it about you and what you want to do on the job. You were able to articulate that back to the original brief and the original outcomes of what they were trying to achieve. And I think that's so important, and so many people miss that because that's ultimately what they care about, and they want that job to go well. They want to get the end result for the client or whoever it is. And oftentimes people fail to link those two things together. So I think that's a really, really important point that I just want to drive home. The second thing that you said is that you had this feeling, and a lot of people I think would refer to that as intuition, or this wave you described it as, that, oh no, this isn't quite right. I'm curious, have you always been good at articulating when that comes up, or were there times in your career where maybe you ignored that feeling?
Ignored, not too often. I'm quite strong-willed in that regard, in the sense that I've always put a really high price, a really high value on my creative journey and doing jobs for the right reasons and trying to take on as few as possible jobs that I might consider as a bill payer. Of course, that's not always possible. We know that. We live in the real world. Maybe what I was a little guilty of in earlier years would have been, as I alluded to earlier, kind of taking almost an adolescent approach to that and feeling a little bit affronted and feeling like, oh God, this isn't the right, I don't want to be doing this job now. And as opposed to actually stepping back and reflecting and working out the way that I could engage the people I'm working with and bring them in on that conversation and help them to understand why I feel that way, and why, going back to the selfless thing, that feeling isn't about ticking my own boxes. It's about giving the best version of me for the best version of their project. And I think that once that's made clear and they feel that jeopardy the same, everyone looks for the right solution. So it's been I've gotten much better at it over the years by soaking up a lot of other people's examples of how they go about that too.
Yeah. And why do you think it's important to say no to as many of those bill paying jobs or bread and butter work, as it's often referred to in the industry, as possible?
I think that's how you create your way forward, your pure path. I think that if you allow yourself to be submerged in those kind of jobs, it becomes a self-replicating thing. And you end up, if it's detached from what I recently heard described as emotional creativity, which is what you want to say about the world, the feelings that you have, and that kind of instinctive, intuitive response, then I think that ultimately you end up too far away from why you might have initially got into this, where the magic lies for you as an individual. I've always seen my portfolio, for example, as a combination of what I'm able to do, but also a statement of intent, where I want to go with my work. I very much to this day, include a lot of personal work, a lot of self-initiated work that expresses what I'm feeling good about, because I know that when you put that out into the world, it opens doors and it attracts people who feel that. There's a resonance that comes when you create work with that feeling of magic. So that's why I've always, don't get me wrong, I will never take, when I say bread and butter jobs, I will never take on a job and do it less than the best of my ability. It's just that sometimes there's maybe a better person who could deliver that and enjoy it more, or it's just not so well aligned with what I'm able to do best, So I think saying no frees you up for the opportunities like that to come. And it's always scary. It took me a long time to start saying no. I said yes to almost everything to begin with. But by doing so, I felt that intuition that said it wasn't right. And I didn't like working on those jobs. I wanted to get them out the door. So I did them to the utmost ability. But that feeling, I struggled at school because of that feeling. I couldn't engage with my subjects until I found the passion that I found in art college. And I've always maintained that to this day. When I'm not feeling passionate, I struggle to fight back that teenage self who switches off. And so if I do that too much, I know I'm going to end up in a bad place where my clients don't get anything close to my best.
That's so interesting, the way that you have been familiar with that feeling for quite a long period of time. And you've been self-aware enough to say, actually, I know when I ignore this, bad things happen. And so actually, in your mind, you've kind of got more pain associated with ignoring that than the pain of maybe saying no to a fairly lucrative job. And I think for a lot of people, that's often switched. They kind of know, oh, if I keep making these decisions long term, this is going to turn out poorly for me. But in the short term, the scariness that you described is way more painful than that long term pain. And I'm just curious if you have any advice for those people.
Yeah, I did a talk last week in Milton Keynes. There's a brilliant night called Geek Night Richard Wiggins runs. He also does All Flows Festival, which is an annual creativity festival in Milton Keynes. And it was the first time I'd done the talk, and it was called Invisible Hands. And Invisible Hands is something that was said by American writer Joseph Campbell. He referred to the feeling that when you're on the right path, when you're moving in the right direction and you tune into that flow, it feels as if there are invisible hands helping you along the way. Be that the opening of a door that you didn't know was there, a person coming into what he terms as your field of bliss, so someone who is almost emerged right time, right place, serendipitous, to help you in some way. It might just be a passing conversation that's triggered a new idea. It might be somebody giving you a commission. But I found time and time again over these last 16 years, and before that also with decisions that I've made, that when it felt good on an instinctive level, but I struggled to articulate that through language and logic, but did it anyway, that feeling was always there, those invisible hands, that sense that I was into something now that was meaningful and was right, not just for me, but for the people that I was going to be involved with moving forward. So I think pay the utmost attention to that feeling. It might be just a little thing that you can only spare 10 minutes a week to do in your shed or whatever it might look like. But you have to have a thing going on in your life that gives you that energy, gives you that buzz, that life energy that you feel is you would be doing it anyway. If the economy collapsed tomorrow, you would still be doing it. Follow that. Joseph Campbell refers to it as following your bliss. And there's something to be said about that. I'm a big believer that you don't need to understand why. You shouldn't try to outlogic yourself and go, well, actually, I will do that because in 6 months' time, it might lead to that amount of money and then I can do this, that, and the other. You have to have something. That's what the bill-paying job, so to speak, or the day job is for, to pay the bills so that you can give time to that stuff. And I remember a conversation we had, Matt, when I interviewed you on my show, where you said about, whatever your capacity of clients is, try to drop one and make yourself a client also, and make that time to spend time doing the stuff you want to do, not just need to do. That balance is absolutely critical. So I think highly prioritize that, even when logic screams at you that you need to be making money and you need to be doing X, Y, and Z. Of course, do that stuff. The needs are important, but you always have to take care of the wants and those healthy desires as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I admire about you, Ben, is that from my perspective of knowing you over the last 5 or 6 years or however long we've known each other, I've seen that through your work and the way that you show up in your life. And I think it's one of the key reasons that you continually get invited to do these cool projects, but you also have your own stuff going on. So let's kind of transition a little bit and talk about your book, because this is the second book that you've written. And just through reading it, I can tell how much work has gone into this and how much time and energy and effort. And this feels to me very much like your baby, or like your creative, one of your creative outlets. And so I'm just curious, what was the thing or the catalyst or the bigger why behind writing this book that you've called the Creative Condition?
It's a major milestone in what has now been a decade's worth of work. Ever since to be honest, as long as I can remember, I've been fascinated by humans, the human condition, by storytelling, by rich characters, and the colour in human beings. In terms of on a conscious level, walking through the doors of art college after the subservience of school was a wonderland to me. And that was really the beginning to consciously observe creativity in other people and really root for that in all of my friends, not just in people who were in the creative industries or had something going on in a formal sense. Any friend, any passerby, even the people shouting on the bus or in the pub, I found them innately fascinating. And what I've come to realize as the years have gone by is that I'm in love with storytelling. And I just see people come alive, and I see people illuminated when they're doing something and they're working for something that's bigger than themselves, or they're connected with something that makes them a part of a community and gives them belonging. And as time has gone by, I've always given myself the freedom to go and moonlight in whatever project, whatever line of inquiry feels good to me on that level. And this is stuff that I'm talking about consciously now after 16 years. For a long time, this was just something I did. I just sort of a part of me as a human being. But really, this started when I voluntarily directed a campaign for Calm, a campaign against living miserably. They're a male mental health charity. They help anyone, but their marketing is focused on guys because of the disproportionate statistics of suicide. And I found that heartbreakingly sad when I learned those stats. And ironically, this was through kind of going off and running this music project when I lived in Manchester the first time around. Another thing where I felt probably shouldn't be doing this, I should be chasing clients, but I was doing it. And I met some people who'd worked with Calm, and I found this incredibly sad as somebody who hadn't really suffered with their mental health. I attribute that to my artistic expression and my creativity. It always gives me a positive outlet and brings people into my life that help me to stay afloat mentally. So I wanted to do something about that because I wanted to share what I felt was this powerful emotional outlet through my artistic expression. I wanted to explore whether other people felt this. And, it was quite a timely topic. I was able to attract people like Stephen Merchant and Danny Dyer for interviews, and Mick Foley from the WWE, and Ken Garland, who's a design hero of mine. I wasn't in any way qualified to interview, but we didn't have any budget, didn't know anyone who could do it for us. So I went and did the interviews. Turns out that the way I talk seems to disarm people, and it brought out these very honest, raw conversations. Of course, that was also helped by the subject matter because it really resonated with the people who agreed to be interviewed. But that kickstarted 10 years of research into creativity because I never stopped. After that campaign, I continued. First, it was through my writing. Then it became the podcast. Then my first book, Champagne and Wax Crayons. Now, this book, it took 2.5 years to write, 10 years of research through my broader life. But ultimately, what it has become is the driving force in my life, because I found myself at a bit of a mental crossroads during early parenthood when things like the climate crisis and a lot of the heaviness of news cycles began to get on top of me. I was more tired than I'd ever been before because of twins. So what that meant was I was feeling low a little too often. And I was trying to do everything. I wanted to go on protests. I wanted to sign petitions. I wanted to donate to charitable causes. I was retweeting too many negative headlines. And all that I ended up doing was freaking out other people on Twitter. And we've all been there. What I came to realize by studying creativity is that actually this isn't just some folly. Creativity is the very reason that humans are on this planet today. You know, we were able to innovate and imagine, to create clothes, to build shelter, to adapt in many, many situations. That's beautiful to me. And I realize that this is a major cause. And actually, this thing that I'm spending all my time doing has great, great value. And I'm better with this single focus than I ever would be trying to be everything to everyone, which none of us can be. So what that did was pull me out of a personal rut, along with a few projects that I came across by other people doing very meaningful work. But once I got into the flow of writing this book, I've never felt invisible hands or serendipity quite like it. The sheer amount of people and things that appeared on my radar and things that kept pushing me towards this goal of writing a manuscript, which coincided with not just twin parenthood, but the quietest spell of my career. I really had to talk myself down from a logical ledge, you know? This was get on and do this thing, because if it's feeling this good and that many doors are opening by what seems like chance, there's something in it. And I'm still doing that. I'm still trusting it. You know, as we speak, I'm building a creative coaching program. The podcast is growing slowly. It feels good. Every day is racked by guilt, but I'm still pushing forward. And there's an artist called Chris Pirate who I recently interviewed, and he said to me, it was pure magic. He said, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm getting there. And that sums it up to a T, how I'm feeling just now.
What a beautiful way to, live your life and run your business. And I love that idea of the logic, really kind of having to talk yourself off the ledge with that logic, because I know that plays into so many people's decision making. And we're aligned on so many different things, and hearing you talk is really refreshing for me, because it's actually helping me to unpick a lot of my ideas around this idea of courage and its link to creative expression, really. Because what you're talking about is there are so many things that you've said today, which I'm like, oh, the courage to do this and the courage to do that. But like what you're saying at your essence is like the courage to follow that feeling and follow what feels good and what feels right, in spite of sometimes the logic not quite adding up. And I think that's something that everybody struggles with, not just in business, but with their life in general. And so I'm just curious, is there anything that you have in terms of a strategy or a way of thinking that allows you to continue on that path in spite of some of the logic telling you that you shouldn't?
I think it's about doing it with sympathy to your circumstances. We're not all in a position. You know, I recently interviewed Stefan Sagmeister live at Off Festival, and Stefan is well known for taking a sabbatical every 7 years, takes a whole year off. And we talked about this, and he talked about the importance of this. But of course, he was mindful of, he'd worked hard over many years, done a lot of high-profile jobs to leverage himself into a position where he could take a year off from the studio. He was very much keen to point out that not everyone has that, but the lesson remains the same. You have to make that time to do work that is just for purity of, you know, it's just curiosity. It's doing something that is for you. We talked about this earlier, but I thought that was important. And it's something I suggested to a friend who was a little down as a new dad, that he wasn't getting time to make any of his art or do anything for himself. And I remember saying to him, why don't you create a tiered to-do list? Make sure you create the right environment so that when the opportunity and the energy comes to make something that's for you, you're able to step in and do that at short notice. But also create a 5-minute to-do list. Something that, you know, let's say you're absolutely knackered. You get 5 minutes when your new baby's napping. There's a number of things you can choose from a list of 5-minute tasks that will help you to start to build that momentum, to feel like you are doing something for you. So when I was a new dad, I wrote my first 2 fiction books. And this isn't a badge of honor. It's not going, look at me, look how productive I was. When I did a lot of this on the toilet and on dog walks. And it was flash fiction, snappy stories that were often just a half a page. But all I had to do was write one line of those that I liked in the morning, either on the toilet or on the dog walk, that I felt good about. And then I could be a dad for the rest of the day without any baggage, without feeling like I wasn't doing anything for me. And I did that because I knew myself well enough to know that I needed to express that emotional creativity every day in some way, shape or form to keep that momentum in my life moving forward. And I think that when you've always got something going on, when you've got that one plate spinning that's for you, it helps to maintain that there's a sense of travel, that you are building to something, that you can be excited about that thing that you're buzzing about. Not only does that then enable you to do the job that maybe you would like to just drop and walk away from, but we can't do that financially. It helps that, it makes that easier, but also that it can be better than that. It can frame that work in such a way where there are now learnings that you can feed into this thing that you are doing, even if it is only 10 minutes a week. So again, it's doing it with sympathy. Some people, there will come times when you need to commit. So at the moment, I'm approaching something of a bridge where it's like, okay, this stuff's starting to move now, the creative condition. That brings its own challenges because I'm still a full-time illustrator. So where does the line lie? Because if I don't commit to one or the other, I'm going to end up a bit of a jack of all trades or watering down both things. So there's thought processes within that, but I think it's good to look at who you are as a person, as a personality. Is financial pressure going to turn you into a nervous wreck? Because if it is, you might need to take a slower approach. You might need to look at ways of monetizing. But ultimately, I think you have to be doing the thing for it to grow and to get that feeling of instinct to know where to travel. But, like Stefan said, you have to work it out in a way that's good for you. Some people just take an hour a week to do their thing, and that's an individual decision based on your own parameters. But I think that it's really important to always be doing something and always feeling good about something, to make the time. We can all fall under the spell of scrolling on social media, watching Netflix, being tired of an evening. Sometimes you've just got to be a little tough on yourself and fight through that, that fatigue, or learn to live on a bit less money. There are ways to look at doing this, and I think you have to do it in respect to yourself. So I can't tell somebody else how to do it, but there are definitely universal truths in terms of the feeling and the emotional connection to our purer creativity.
You use the word compassion there, and it sounds to me like what you're describing is actually a form of self-love almost.
Yeah, very much so. It's the reason I worked full-time for 2 years in any job I could get my hands on after graduating, because I knew that, God, the financial pressure I would be under if I threw myself in the deep end without a website, without a portfolio, without a business card, and trying to do illustration work and trying to build up from scratch would crush me, because I'm a highly sensitive person. I feel the panic of that stuff quite strongly. So I have to make sure that I've got a few things going on that are paying. So yeah, compassion to self, and then that starts to get into the territory of actually knowing yourself. A lot of us walk around with learned behaviors and not at peace with our flaws, strengths, weaknesses, however you want to frame it. There's exercises that I lay out in this book in terms of looking at the duality of our personality traits. So what might be a really strong trait, a real strong suit, will invariably have a negative side if you use that in the wrong context. I think of my own drive. I've got a lot of passion. I juggle a lot of projects at once. I've got a real work ethic. As long as I'm motivated by my passion. The downside of that is I can be a bit of a bull in a china shop, try running before I can walk, do too many things, and end up not really focusing on any one thing. The flip side of that is I'm very clumsy and haphazard. And, it's a pain for my wife and around the house, but it's the genesis of my art style too. That's something in me, the way I talk, the way I write, the way I draw. It's very raw and rugged. That's just a natural thing. So I'm very much at peace with the downside of that, and I just learn to manage it. The upside is that I've been able to build a unique identity, that is relatively trend-proof as a visual communicator. So it's a lovely thing, spending time with yourselves, paying attention to why you're drawn to certain things, why certain things might irritate you, what makes you sad, what makes you happy. There's never any wasted time in learning to know yourself better, because then you can really create structures that work for you. I think it was Radim Malinic I was talking to recently, who has 2 brilliant new books out, Creativity for Sale and The Mindful Creative. And he was talking about how, there's that old thing that creativity kind of happens on its own timeline. But ultimately, builders have to go and work 9 till 5 and build a house. They might not be feeling it. We have to find a certain degree of self-discipline. We can have all the ideas. We can spend time in our life imbibing all the things that will bring the great ideas. But ultimately, our clients are on timelines, so we do have to produce in certain time slots. And I do think that the better you know yourself and the more you know how to adapt on any given day to make yourself the best you can possibly be, then, everybody's going to win from that.
Yeah, you touched on something there, which you talk about in the book, which is this kind of difference between the creativity that you do purely for yourself and the creativity that comes through client demands and deadlines. So I want to transition into that, but before I do, The question that's coming up for me is, do you have any strategies to share with people that would allow them to know themselves better and be slightly more aware of some of these tendencies that you just outlined?
Yeah, I think community is huge. Community and sociability is massive. Now, I know that there's a lot of introverts and sensitive people in our industry. However, we're social creatures. No matter where you lie on that spectrum, we evolved in small groups of people. It's an evolutionary need to be loved for who we are. And that comes from giving us a greater chance of survival when times were harder, when we had to survive, when we had more predators, when we had to adapt to harsh climates and environments. I find that very interesting. So after COVID, a lot of people took time to get back to going outdoors and seeing other people because we got into habits, as we all did during a very strange time, staying indoors, huddling under a blanket and watching a lot of TV, reading, or whatever that might be. But ultimately, ideas and sense of self really thrive in environments where we are around other people who can complement us, who can perhaps highlight something in us, and we can recognize the benefits that we bring. One exercise that I picked up recently was from Athena Actipis, who is a professor at the Arizona State University. She's a professor in psychology, and she's written a brilliant book recently called A Field Guide to the Apocalypse. It's written in a really fun, creative way, but it's a very serious book. It's looking at things like the climate crisis, but that could also be looked at from personal risk. It's about risk management and about communities, and she's very big on tribes. And one of her exercises is to create your zombie apocalypse team. She uses the lens of zombies as a kind of fun filter to address topics that might otherwise make us freeze up through fear. And it's about who in your local community would complement your skill set and your weaknesses. So I mentioned the clumsy thing earlier. I've got no DIY sensibility. I'm not a very practical person. I'm not a convergent thinker. Therefore, I began to think, on the dog walk in the mornings, who would be on my team? And I started having this conversation with the people on the dog walk. Very quickly, I learned that a few people could hunt. I never would have thought that about them. And they turn around and say, well, yeah, I want you on my team for your creativity. So I think that's a very fun, overt way of looking at it. But I do think that it's important to push yourself to spend time around groups of people. It might be something really, it might be, do it through fun. If you're a reader, get yourself to a local book club. It might feel intimidating. You might not feel you have the energy to do that. But by doing that, you come away and you feel valued as part of a group. And I think that's really important for learning to understand the self. And there's a bit in the talk I'm putting together at the moment where I've kind of looked at this idea of like-minded people. I think you have to be mindful of that. That can be, if you only surround yourself by like-minded people, how do you learn about other aspects of more challenging people? So one of the things I would caveat that with is saying, try to push yourself and get into social groups where some people might make you feel a little intimidated. There might be people who are very different to you. There are ways to do that. You can look at clubs and societies of ways of doing that. But I've always been interested by people who kind of challenge me in some way, or people who are quite strong characters, quite outspoken. I'm not overly outspoken. I'm good at talking my shtick about creativity, but I'm not a confrontational person by any stretch. But by getting into little groups like my dog walking community, there are people there that I wouldn't necessarily find within my creative industry. And what they do is they shine light on parts of me that I might not have thought about, and they'll highlight certain traits. So I think the social thing and the groups and the tribes is really, really big for that.
Is that a case of sort of literally outright asking people, hey, what are my strengths? What do you see are my weaknesses? Because I know sometimes people are, especially if they don't know you that well, they're maybe a little bit reluctant because they don't want to offend you, or they feel like they don't want to say something wrong. What's the kind of practicalities of what you just described?
I think once again, you have to do it through character. You have to be attentive to how introverted or how confident you are. I don't particularly ask outright as such, but I am an observant person by nature, so I do pay attention to how people behave around me and how comfortable people are around me, how comfortable I might be around them. And I try to unpick those thoughts. What I love about observing people is that there's always more than meets the eye. People behave the way they behave for myriad reasons, and it's often very complex. So, the way that my mother raised me to kind of be very sympathetic to people and take that moment to consider why they might behave in a certain way. So there might be a certain person that everybody calls I don't know what, I'm not going to throw out a random insult, but they might be quite mean to them, or they might write them off as a weirdo or whatever it might be. I used the example of a person shouting on the bus earlier. Growing up in a town like Keighley in West Yorkshire, you got your fair share of those. But as you grow older, my mum was very emotionally intelligent, and she would always challenge me to think about why that person might be doing that and not to judge them too quickly. Therefore, I've always taken that mentality into social groups and been very tolerant of everyone. But I also just find that it enriches my life to have the broadest group of people around me that I can, not just in my work life, but in my social life too. And I just think it's magic. And I think that I notice things about myself, whether it's the way people respond to me, things they might pick, the things they might say about me, or the things they might highlight. So having a regular group like on the dog walk, it's at a level now where there's no small talk anymore. It's straight into the deep stuff every morning, and we all do the big loops of this field. But what you find is people will turn around and highlight you for a certain reason in a certain conversation, and I find that really interesting to see how people perceive me from the outside. And does that tally up with the way that I feel, or does it open something up, an awareness about myself that might not have been there before? That's what I've loved about our industry in the arts, because you all come with a certain passion. I turned up to college with a Metal Gear Solid artwork book. That was my thing. That was my outward way of going, here I am to do this thing. This is what I'm into right now. And everyone else had their thing. It might have been a fashion sense or whatever else. And I think there's a certain breaking down of what we had at school, which was everyone being a chameleon and everyone trying to fit in, just not to attract naysayers, We can all relate to that. But maybe that's a little bit of a rambly answer, but I just think that by spending time in broader groups and paying attention and asking questions of other people and being quite honest, not in a confrontational way, but by bearing as much as you're comfortable to bear about yourself around people, it ingratiates you into little communities. And that's something that Athena is really big on in this globalized world that we live in, with a lot of online interactions, but maybe not so many interactions with our neighbours. I think you surrender a little bit of that intimacy that you can find in small local communities. And that's something I'm trying to pull back into my life at the moment, and has been very helpful, particularly as I try to explore this idea of studying creativity more and more.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the other thing about community in person is the energy that you get from people in person, and the vibe, for want of a better word, that you pick up from people that allows you to explore some of those things in a bit more detail. I think one of the things that I observe about you, Ben, is you are very curious. And it's interesting that you said your mum brought you up not to be judgmental, and she was very emotionally intelligent. It seems to me that that has very much rubbed off on your approach to a lot of these things. Have you got any thoughts or advice for people who aren't so good at doing that, and maybe take some of these negative traits personally and to heart, and get in negative spirals and negative self-talk about those things, which maybe then go on to impact their confidence?
These things are often very deep-rooted. It often comes back to learned behaviours, and the reason why we might respond in a certain way to a certain thing. I think it's small steps is always a good starting point. So start with people you do feel confident around, and lean on the people within your immediate circle. Maybe start trying to foster conversations that make you feel a little more vulnerable in a safer environment to begin with. I'm the kind of person who I see it as a fortunate thing. I'm able to walk into a pub, for example, and strike up a conversation with a person at the bar, and quite quickly reveal something that is very intimate about myself, because I love what that stimulates and how that brings people into my life in a way that is sustainable and might create a longer term relationship, even if it's just someone you might pass by in the street and stop for a little bit of small talk. But I think that introverted people tend to, they can be quite good at this online. So there's a certain thing that's, that I love about Twitter or X, whatever you want to refer to it as. I've made many acquaintances on there through my industry who I've then gone on to meet in person to find are painfully shy or really struggle or don't often come to the in-person events because they struggle to make that big commitment, which is intimidating. In my younger years, in my teenage years, I felt very much like that. It was the kind of art college that brought me out of my shell a little more. So I do know to a degree what that feels like. One lens that I do love is fiction. And I think that it's partly the reason I write fiction is to kind of work through the insurmountable, was Chuck Palahniuk, the author of Fight Club, who talks about reasons for writing. And a good a reason as anybody to start writing is to try and to work through the insurmountable. If there's a thing in your life, an immovable presence that you consider negative, write through it. Create characters, create communities in fiction to work through these things. And I think that it's the reason that over the many years, books stand the test of time, because characters are created that say something about a certain experience that people can relate to, a struggle that people have. People like George Orwell, his storytelling was magnificent for that, and it's as relevant today as it ever was. So reading far and wide is a good place to do that, because you find character traits that you might relate to in the world of fiction, be that a TV show, be that a book, that puts it in another context that helps you to make sense of the way that you are yourself. And that's quite an empowering feeling, I find.
Yeah, like I'm not alone.
Yeah, I remember coming across Fight Club at a really important age. I always cite Chuck Palahniuk because he had a big impact on my life, but I remember coming across Fight Club at about 16 when I was really starting to become aware of the way that people would censor themselves and not allow themselves to dare to dream or to commit to a certain thing. And that might have been a result of a relationship they were in. It might have been a societal thing, a cultural thing. Being from Keighley, there's a dourness, a certain drollness to certain parts of West Yorkshire where you're challenged for daring to dream, and it's seen as a bit of a lofty thing at times. I think that's culturally relevant. There's a lot of hard times, economic hard times in the past that have kind of kickstarted that. But what Fight Club did was put this in a lens and in a context that was universal, that I understood through the eyes of this protagonist, that what I was feeling wasn't something that alienated me. It was actually quite a natural response to capitalism. I never would have been able to learn that. I didn't have many cultural horizons as a kid growing up, so I couldn't have articulated the way I was feeling in any other way until I found this character, Tyler Durden. The arts are such a vehicle for learning to, getting to know yourself better. I had an interview with a drama and English teacher the other week, and she was talking about working with a lot of children from poorer backgrounds who've had a tough start in life, not had the guidance that some of us might have benefited from. And she talked about drama as being this wondrous vehicle for helping them to overcome those introversions and that lack of trust you might have in adult figures in your life in a safe space. And the way she gets them to throw a chair across the room at the start of the session. And these are kids that are often getting kicked out of classes for doing exactly that. And they struggle to do it at first. They're going, but can I miss? Because I get in trouble for it over there. And they're going, do it. And they're the first ones at the door in drama every time. And through drama, they learn tolerance. They learn collaboration. They learn to see that they can succeed, that they can overcome those introversions and those sensitive tendencies. And by the end of doing something like that, it really helps you to get in touch with yourself. So, maybe drama's one route to it, but that's not going to be for everyone. But this is why I cite fiction, because I think it falls within that sphere.
Well, what we're picking up on here is a theme, really, which overarches the premise of your book. And the reason I love it so much, which is this idea that creativity is a human necessity and it's not a luxury, and it has so many different applications and so much potential to create an impact in the world. And so I think this is important for a few reasons. Number one, I think you probably agree that running a creative business after a while with a lot of clients, it can feel like creativity is a nice to have. It can feel like the thing that you do, illustration, video production, graphic design, is just a nice to have, and you're like the first to go. And I think that creates a lot of confidence issues for people. And I think it creates a lot of almost existentialism where people go, well, what's the point? And I know for me, that's where I was in my creative journey before I started coaching, which was this feeling of what's the point of all of this? Why does it matter? And I almost kind of threw in the towel on creativity because I was so focused on the kind of artistic side of creativity and the less tangible things. And right there, you've just touched on a very, very tangible example of this is how drama and the creative expression of movement and all of these different things can teach young, vulnerable children huge life lessons, right? So can you just talk for a second about the idea that what we do as creatives is about more than just the output of our skill set, i.e., illustration.
100%. Yeah, it's why I love this industry, because it gives great value, priceless value to your story, to you as a personality, as a individual, as a unique being in this world. We are all walking acts of self-expression to a degree. And I think that when you feel like even the most mundane, what seems like run-of-the-mill experience, neighborhood, observation, when you can turn that into magic and something that can help someone, be that in a commercial environment or be that in an artistic or a more playful sense, that's an amazing feeling. I know now when I come to a job, I'm bringing not just my CV and my portfolio and my skill set, I'm bringing my ideas and my personality and my unique view on the world. They're the jobs that enliven me the most, and I think they're what we should all be seeking, especially now. We're in a new wild west of automation as we speak. Some pretty robust terms put out there the other week by Meta and by Adobe, and it's concerning. And I think that AI is ramping up at a speed that is ferocious, and it's going to be tough to adapt for a lot of us if we are simply a process and a piece of output. But if that work brings a human story and a value that maybe, yes, can be mimicked to a degree, but cannot be created in the same way in real time to bring value right now in a context that is valuable to clients, it's about finding that. That's the crux of creativity. And I think that what's going to happen is we're going to see a major shake-up. And if what you do is replicable in its entirety as just a product, automation's here. That's going to be under threat. But if people want to work with you because you're reliable, because you deliver unique ideas, because you bring a value that can't be engineered by typing a prompt on a keyboard, then they're the people who are going to remain. We're all going to have to adapt to a degree, but I just think that all the work that I love, all the books that I've read, all the films that have moved me in some way, a piece of writing, a poem, it doesn't matter what it is, it's got a human voice behind it. And if that is a lived experience that's been configured in a way that has that emotional effect and that gravity on people, then you're making magic, and it's going to be timeless, and only you could have ever made that at the time that you made it. So yeah, it's as valuable as it ever was.
And what are some ways that you reinforce that to yourself? Because I know just firsthand from my clients, people really struggle with this idea that I am more than my skill set. So rather than seeing yourself as an illustrator, you're kind of saying, well, we're not just illustrators, we are creatives. Is there anything that you do which enables you to reinforce that to yourself, but I guess more importantly, reinforce that to your clients?
Yeah, I think I'm always very keen to get on calls to talk to my clients, to make them laugh. Humor is huge in my life. Like it's in my writing, it's in my art, it's in the things I love in the world. It's about humor and storytelling always. So I try to bring that in. I try to behave. Of course, we do it all with a degree of a filter. Depends. You have to adapt. You can turn yourself up to 2, to 5, to 10. But with sympathy to that side of things, I'm always willing to make a joke, to make somebody laugh, to break out of what can be a clinical professional conversation at times, if I know it brings a level of humanity that people are going to enjoy working with me more. It loosens people up. It puts people in that mindset where they're more willing to listen to an idea, like we discussed earlier, if there's a way to improve a job. If they engage with you as a human and there's a relationship there, far likelier to make you desirable for your product. It's going to enliven your product even more, because through the process of creating that work, if there's been a relationship and a concurrent conversation, then people will remember that more. The work is going to be more meaningful for everybody involved if they also engage the personality driving it. So I just think that you really can't undervalue the personality. You have to let it bleed into your ideas, into the way you conduct yourself, even into the way you dress and the way you make your creative environment. If your workspace reflects you, it might only be a Zoom call, for example, but it's all a part of you. It's all an outward projection of who you are and why somebody might want to work with you as a human. I really believe that.
Yeah, and it's about not being afraid to bring your personality into all of those things. And I'm just wondering why you think that people don't do that more often, and why do they hide behind the guise of a skill set or some kind of persona?
We come up through school and we work in jobs, and there's at every level, there's a degree of subservience and hierarchy. And I think that's kind of a learned behavior thing. I think there's a respect thing there. I mentioned it earlier with TBWA. I sincerely believe I was being more respectful by challenging the CEO's idea in the right way than not. If I'd not challenged her idea and I'd accepted it feeling like it was less than 100% in quality, I think that would have been disrespectful, So by doing that, by kind of almost getting above my station, just this lonely freelancer out here in a glorified shed, talking to a CEO in America, there's a lot there. There's a lot of reasons for me to put Erin on a pedestal. And that would be a deserved pedestal. And don't get me wrong, she is on that pedestal when it comes to, I'm very happy to be working with a person who's got that clout. However, I know she's still a human being and she still wants the best creative outcome in that job. So if challenging her on that is what I needed to do to get the best for everyone, then that's what I'm going to do. I think that I'm always aware of a job title or a position or a person, who's got acumen or credibility. I think we like I say, we get that through employment and also through family dynamics. Everyone's got a certain relationship with their elders, their parents, their mentors, whoever that might be. I think these things have long-lasting effects on us. But if you always make the creativity, make the quality of the work and the relationship the utmost important thing, even to the point of challenging authority, I think people like it. I think people in authority like to be challenged if it's done for the right reasons. I've walked out of part-time jobs when I was a kid, when I lost my rag and called bosses, the C word. Kind of regret that looking back. That wasn't the right way to behave. It was, that person's still going to have hurt feelings, even though my boss and even though they might have angered me to the point of doing that. I don't have much of a temper, but they really pushed me to a point. I did that. I look back, that's my younger self. I wouldn't ever do that again. That's not the way to challenge authority. You have to do it in a respectful way. But when you're engaged as a freelancer, as a business owner, there is a respect there. It's business to business. So if you can't meet that person at their level and have open, frank conversations to get to the best outcome, then I think you're going to lose out somewhere. And I think that it does have an adverse impact on that professional relationship if you don't challenge, I really believe that.
Yeah. There's three things that have become apparent for me through this conversation. There are attributes or qualities that you have, which I think are essential if you want to be successful and not be outpaced by technology or whatever the next threat is in the creative economy. The first one is you clearly have a very high level of self-awareness, and you're very aware of not only your qualities, but also your perceived flaws, for want of a better word. The second thing is that you are often focused on something outside of yourself. So like a bigger mission or a bigger objective. And then the third thing is you constantly stay curious. You're trying not to get too attached to why this person said this thing. You're genuinely curious, like, oh, I want to learn more about why they're behaving in this way or why they said this thing. And so I think it's pretty undeniable, at least from this conversation, that those three things play a critical role in your success up until this point. And I'm just wondering if, and the answer might be no to this, and that's okay, but I'm just wondering if there are any strategies or techniques that you have to foster those three attributes.
So the awareness of self, it's paying attention to feelings, unpicking feelings a little bit more. And, there might be things in your life that make you close off to a certain idea, or maybe somebody says something that immediately causes you to judge them or walk away. I feel I don't need this person in my life. Sometimes I think it's better to seek understanding, to train yourself almost to understand a broader range of humans and human traits, and to recognize those responses in yourself. A big part of me getting over the low that I mentioned earlier was stepping aside from myself and recognizing that part of my chimp brain, so to speak, the part that's evolved, the part that is honed in on fear, to recognize threats in my environment. That's an evolutionary trait in the human brain. That's why we get the fight or flight instinct when we see a negative headline, for example, on social media. And it puts us in that highly responsive, adrenaline-fueled mindset. Through trying to understand that and overcome it was a big turning point for me, because I was able to recognize the beginnings of that feeling again, very quickly stepping aside and assessing whether this is a genuine threat that I need to be worried about right now, or whether it's something that I can't change, that I'm better off focusing on something that is more positive and more additive to my life. So again, paying attention to feelings and unpicking and unpacking, and ask if you've got the trust of loved ones, talk to them, ask them about how they perceive you as well, and have some fun conversations about how they feel about you. Because like I said, that understanding of self and doing things on those terms, whether that's the way you make your work, whether it's the way you approach clients for new business, whether it's the way that you diffuse a disagreement halfway through a job, for example. You know, if you can do that with a degree of confidence and trust, then I think it's a healthy thing to have. Can you remind me of the other two?
Yeah, you're
Sorry.
like, what else do I do well? Yeah. So self-awareness. And then the second thing was like a focus on things outside of yourself.
So, I mean, it's huge. One of the biggest joys I have ever had from this career, and also just from the enjoyment of any other piece of culture that I've ever connected with emotionally, is its place in the world. And, you know, we can't always do things completely purely for, you know, because we live under capitalism. We have to pay the bills, unless we're very fortunate and we're so well off that we don't need to do that. But I've always had an eye on a cause. There's always been something going on. Now my cause is creativity. It's so much bigger than myself. What's lovely about that is it's completely removed ego. Not that I ever had much of an ego, but certainly in my younger years as an illustrator, I used to feel remotely competitive. Completely silly, because it's a totally subjective art form. And it's that thing. I now know that you should only compete against yourself. You can take inspiration from other people and you can learn from others. But to compare, it's the old thing. It's the thief of joy. But I just think that when you're working towards something that's bigger than you, it has a way of removing ego. I now create thinking even beyond my own death. That might sound heavy, but, I heard it referred to as intergenerational equity. And it's the idea that we're placing as much value on future generations as we are the here and now, in terms of resources, in terms of our behaviors and our decisions. So making this work, I'm very aware that it might take the rest of my lifetime to start significantly moving the needle in terms of creativity and education, and creativity's value in, the mental health crisis. But if I get it to a point where it's better than when I got here, fine with that. Excites me to think what my kids might run and do with that, So that's fine. It was on Stefan Sagmeister's film, The Happy Film, where he featured Jonathan Haidt, who's a professor at the New York University. And he wrote The Happiness Hypothesis, and he talks about that being a fundamental pillar of happiness is working towards something that's bigger than yourself. And I've always had a cause or a bit of a personal manifesto, and you don't even need to voice it. You don't have to bang a big drum about this. This can just be a very quiet thing that's underpinning your own actions. But I think it gives you great meaning in the world, great purpose, and it's another thing that we need as humans.
Wow, man. I mean, the last one was curiosity. I don't know if you have any thoughts on, as Steve Jobs always used to say, stay hungry, stay foolish. What's the way to keep a level of curiosity in not only the work that you do, but maybe the sort of client interaction? Someone's not happy with the work. It's very easy to jump to panic stations. Oh, what have I done? And the focus is very much on myself. How do we stay curious in creativity and maybe in those interactions?
For me, humor is a great driver. I mentioned it earlier, but humor, if something, I won't remember what Laura's asked me to get down at the supermarket 10 minutes ago, Laura being my wife. But I will remember something somebody said in a passing conversation 25 years ago, like it was yesterday. My brain has a way of doing that with humor. Therefore, if I think there's a funny idea or a funny train of thought in something, I find that a really strong thread for me personally. It's always run throughout my work, and it might not be over. A lot of my writing is quite darkly comedic, but in other ways, it might just be in the way that I make a paint mark, or the way that I draw. And in terms of staying curious in business, I think it's good to be naive, like this whole, I keep referring back to this current job with TBWA, but in my younger years, I would have been very intimidated by this. And there were times when I almost had a subconscious reaction going as far as rejecting a job or admitting defeat on a job and bailing on it because I felt just so overwhelmed by the challenge at hand and by the people involved. So when I got my first Guardian commission, it was poor to average at best, the first job that I did. But what I had not taken into account is that they knew I was a new illustrator, and this was tomorrow's chip paper. This was a newspaper. It was a daily, and that's the reason that you get your break in an editorial as an illustrator, because there's a degree of disposability about it. Whereas you wouldn't get a Nike ad campaign right off the bat. You might do if you're doing something really spectacular. It's not impossible, but the chances of making your break in editorial are far higher. So, but halfway through that job, I felt like turning around to the art director and saying, "I'm so sorry, but I'm out of my depth here. Like I've lost it. I've come apart at the seams," and I very nearly did. I didn't. I saw it through. Luck would have it, I got commissioned the very next day for a different part of the newspaper, so it couldn't have been too bad. But, there are times when I feel like that. And if I'd stopped to look at the fact that in this job is a director from the States, there's a guy who writes for the New Yorker, TBWA Worldwide, all these titles and names again, I might have got intimidated and freaked out. But as it goes, I didn't. They expressed which was very lovely, they expressed that they really wanted to work with me specifically on this job. This wasn't a pitch thing. This was something they felt was very much me. They made me feel very welcome coming on board. So I'm very curious to know, why they wanted to do this. What did they want to get out of it? Why are they working with me and these people? What's the chemistry there? If you can learn to see that in the same way that you might do a college project that's got a lot less riding on it, you'll get a lot more out of it. There's something about being relaxed. And I talk about this in one of my talks. So James Brown, who used to edit Loaded, famously a complete head case in the 90s, a lot of intoxicants, a lot of tomfoolery, but produced a brilliant magazine because, as he put it, there's a lot of fucking about. That's how he termed it. And I called my talk Just Fucking About because I was so inspired by that. He talks about that relaxed atmosphere of hanging around with bands as a kid when you're into music and the playfulness that generates and the trust within it. And he talks about the Happy Mondays, who were mentored by Tony Wilson, who famously loved the fact that the Happy Mondays were a little gang as opposed to polished musicians, and gave them record studio time for free way before they were ready to make vinyl. Sean Ryder told me about that. He told me about the fact that they were in there and they were well out of their depth. But what Tony Wilson saw was that curiosity that you mentioned, that fun-loving willingness to get things wrong and to just fuck around and really let themselves go in the creative process. And what they got was one of the more unique bands of the generation from that. And I think you can very much foster that within even corporate environments. I think if you bring your personality, like I said before, you do it for the right reasons and you allow that curiosity to be seen and recognized. At the end of the day, people who are our superiors are probably going to be a bit busier than us. They're very grateful for our services and for taking that off their desk. And if we do that in a way that's trustworthy, that's reliable, and that is high quality and led by curiosity, they're going to want to do that with you time and time again. So I think there are very much ways to bring that into a professional sphere.
Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. You are very articulate, and I feel like I could keep talking to you for hours and hours on end. I know you got a flight to catch and you've got some work to do, so we're going to wrap it up here. But you've got the book. Where can people grab a copy of that? So
at the moment, the signed paperbacks are available at bentallonwriter.com. You'll find my little shop there. It's also on Amazon Kindle for the ebook. Going to be an audiobook in production at the moment. It's just taking a little time because I've got to narrate the thing. By doing a podcast, you kind of corner yourself and your listeners demand that it's you. So I'm not quite ready to turn to AI for my voice yet. So I'm going to be doing that. It's going to take a little time. It'll soon be available wider on Amazon and the likes, but busy old schedule. So I'm just taking my time with that.
Keeping it real. And I know you're taking on a select handful of coaching clients as well. I know for a fact that there'll be people listening to this who are thinking, how do we get a bit more of Ben's time? Where can people connect with you and where can people find out a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Very excited about that. Like I say, it's distilling this 10 years of work into a way that I can really package and help people with as a coach. So at the moment, the website and everything's in production. The coaching's being developed. I'm hoping the autumn this year it's going to be ready, but by for sure, come and declare your interest. I've already got a few statements of interest of people who are kind of chomping at the bit, which is a lovely compliment and very exciting. But for now, you can get me on LinkedIn. I'm very prominent on there. Feel free to drop me a message, say hello, or email me if you want to do it privately, hello@bentallon.com.
Awesome, man. Dude, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. I'm sure this won't be the last time that we record an episode together. Good luck on the job, and I'll speak to you again soon.
Thanks for your time, Matt. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Before you leave, if you found this episode valuable, please hit the subscribe button. Also, if you are a creative business owner doing more than 10K a month and you want to grow and scale without working longer hours or hiring a massive team, then I have something you may be interested in. We have just developed a tool that will give you a custom growth strategy based on exactly where you are in your business right now. So you can stop consuming lots of random content and trying to figure things out on your own and actually get something personalized to you. You will also receive a free copy of my book, and it will point out relevant chapters. If you'd like to take the scorecard, it's totally free. You just have to click the link in the show notes or connect with me on LinkedIn, and you will see a link in my bio. Thanks for listening. This is the Creative Courage Podcast.